and I will continue here. Okay, now you can watch it in chunks. Continuing on, contacting the higher self, contacting the holy guardian angel. The first thing I want to talk about is silence and stilling the mind. There are probably a lot of people that want to say all you have to do to contact your higher self or your holy guardian angel. Let's just use the term highest self for here, at least for a while. Unless I'm more specific, because that was the question. Both questions were about the higher self. I like the term highest self, I guess, but even using the word self, if you watch the other video, is just inadequate. But a lot of people will probably just tell you, if you want to contact your highest self or higher self or whatever, all you have to do is still your mind and listen, in silence, preferably. This is, again, for some of the reasons stated and quoted in the last video, in this, what I suppose could be called a series, is that, okay, first of all, stilling your mind is an incredibly difficult thing to do, if you don't already do some type of stillness meditation. And it's not, yeah, it's not difficult once you really realize that it's easy, but until you realize that it's easy, it's extremely difficult. Whoa. That's the first part, and then the listening part is even harder, because once you begin to listen again, you've stilled your mind, okay, for like 5 seconds, and you're absolutely astonished that you've gotten that far, and now you start to listen. It's like if somebody tells you, don't look at anything yellow, the first thing you see is something yellow, and so if you start listening, you have it in your head, oh my god, now I'm listening for a voice, you're going to start to hear all the little voices again. And all the little selves, and all the little aspects of your personality and ego, blah, and all that craziness. And so it's really difficult to discern the voice from your highest self. Or is it? Yeah, so that goes into mind stilling and silence, and I want to say that silence as a practice isn't going to help you unless you practice silence for an extended period of time. If you do decide to take a vow of silence, let's say you decide you have 3 days off and you decide to spend those entirety of those 3 days in complete silence, you're going to start to notice something. You're going to start to notice a change in your mental perception, and if you do then sit down to meditate, you're going to notice a big difference within the silence. So that's the only point I wanted to make about silence. And stilling the mind, again, stillness meditation is awesome, and you should absolutely practice it. But if you're just going to sit down for 15 minutes and listen, it's better than nothing, but there it is. Okay, and then I suppose this sort of leads into a discussion which I really have not even outlined how I'm going to attack this, which is the issue of a still mind versus an open mind. And I shouldn't say versus. I should say the still mind and the open mind. This is going to be an interesting one. There are certain things I've learned in my own practice. And this also delves into the issue of sudden apprehension. I'm going to talk about right after this. A still mind is like a silent mind. You're able to calm the waters. You're able to perceive and just perceive without all these things bubbling and churning and all these distractions to react to, even if they're just internal distractions. An open mind is something different. And I don't mean open-mindedness. An open mind, it's basically like opening your crown chakra and letting something come into it. And the difficult part is that once you learn to open your mind, you realize that you can open it toward a specific purpose. The way I feel it is basically like you can put an intention in your third eye, and I feel it in this fashion energetically. You can focus an intention in your third eye and you start to feel a pressure. Then you can open up your crown chakra to source, basically, or in this case, let's say to your highest self, and something will come through and be further grounded in the third eye to where it's more easily experienced because it's a less dense, or a less not as high a frequency as the information that suddenly comes through. I'm not describing this adequately. And you will know it. Whatever it is that comes through, you will know it. And that brings me to the sudden apprehension, and that is what I call sudden apprehension. And it involves using the focused, still mind and the completely open mind. So I'll just tell you about my personal experience coming to this strange understanding. You might have something completely different to say about it. In Kunlun practice, we're often taught about surrender. And the issue of surrender comes up, the idea of surrender, the process of surrender as a tool. You have to surrender in order for things to start happening. And the way I understood surrender was basically passing out. This is true in that you allow yourself to be blank or whatever, and you allow anything to happen. That's a certain understanding and execution of the process of surrender. True surrender doesn't involve anything. It involves surrender. It's a difficult thing to really get a hold of, especially when you're talking about using it as a tool. How can you intentionally surrender? Is that really surrender? Well, what I would find is that I would be in a point and I would get stuck. And I would be like, okay, my mind is chattering too much, I'm going to surrender now. And so then I would just clear my mind as much as possible and just allow anything to come through that would come through, and it works. And, well, I would start to get these jolts, and, everything would start shaking it up again, and, welling feelings of bliss and all this good stuff. But it would only last for a very short time. And then I would have to do it again. Oh, surrendered again. Whoa! And then things start to happen, and then, and it was just this process of, getting extreme blasts of cosmic energy and then not knowing what else to do, because it's really difficult to remain in that feeling of total abandon and surrender. What I have come to understand since is that there is another process involved, and you have to pay attention. This is the listening part, or the focusing part, that is a little bit more down here. The surrender, I would open up, and it was like an opening or a blossoming, and then stuff would come through and everything would happen. And I'm using this in the context of Kunlun. I apologize. But the focus is different. The focus has to do with the silence and the stillness and the third eye. And so you would focus on everything that is happening. This is the best way that I can do it, especially in the context of Kunlun. You focus on what is happening. And see, if you open your mind and you surrender, then all these things start to happen. It's impossible to remain in that passing out feeling of surrender, of abandon, when things start to move. And this is again in the context of Kunlun, because Kunlun involves intense shaking. So does Qigong, which I'm going to start to talk about a lot more soon. And if you don't focus, if you don't pay attention, then exactly what used to happen to me just keeps happening. You get a blast, you get distracted, then you have to surrender again, then you get another blast, then you get distracted, then you have to surrender again. If you can focus and pay attention to everything that is happening as it is happening without judging it, then you will remain in a much more, it can't even be described how much more intense, vivid, blissful, mentally blissful, which is a huge thing, because you can feel sexual bliss is like the basest form of bliss, I want to say, or ecstasy. and then you can have a little less physical until you have emotional bliss or ecstasy, and then to actually have mental bliss, it's like jhana meditation. It's like being in a room meditating for an entire year, you might get to this state of having a feeling of mental bliss. It's tremendous. And the purification that happens from having that stillness and that focus and that attention, where you're paying attention to everything as it's happening, but you're not judging it, and it's still happening, and it's like these two processes happening at once, but they're somehow merged, and tremendous things begin to happen. Now, can I please bring this back around to connecting with the higher self? I don't know. I'm going to attempt to. When you engage in a process of connecting to the higher self, this might be the meat that you're looking for in watching these videos. If you've come this far, congratulations. I've been able to apply this process that I've learned through several years of Kunlun. I'm going to call it Yigong now. We'll just start that. When you apply the process, you open up to Source, you open up to your highest self, to just listen and surrender to it is only going to do one thing. You're going to get that blast of cosmic energy, that information, that imprint come through, and it will come through. But you might not know what to do with it if you're not paying attention. And that's where the stillness and the silence and the focus comes in. And I know this isn't very well outlined, I apologize. That's where the focus comes in. If you can pay enough attention, if you can focus enough, if you can get to that place where you feel the heat of existence around you and everything that is happening and all you're doing is noticing it. You're just witnessing it. You're paying attention to it. You're focusing on it, yes, but you're not judging it in any way. You're not holding on to it. You're just experiencing it. And open your mind at the same time. Open your crown chakra to let that information come through. You will have the sudden apprehension, which is what I was trying to explain before. What I'm calling sudden apprehension is, and this brings me to something else, but I'm going to try and finish this first. Your angel, your highest self, doesn't communicate in language, in these human words which are so long and cumbersome and arbitrary. It communicates on a much different level than you can even realize. For all of that stuff to come down, it's perfectly willing to put it into terms that you understand. You're just going to get that blast of information, and if you have the focus and you have the openness and everything, you will have the sudden apprehension of what it is trying to tell you. And it's not words, at least not for me, although you can put it into words. One can put it into words. It is... oh God. Okay, my sci-fi nerd roots are showing, but if any of you are old Star Trek fans, not the first series, but the Next Generation. I can't believe I'm talking about this. Seriously, good God. Deanna Troi was an empath. She was telepathic, but only in an emotional sense. A really interesting, unique idea. So she could feel people's strong emotions. We're developing that ability these days, by the way. That's becoming a very common experience for people. Somebody next to you has an emotional experience, and all of a sudden you just kind of like, whoa, and you felt what they were feeling. You feel a tightness in your chest. You feel a wavering energy come through you that you're not exactly sure. It makes you feel really uncomfortable. You know that that person is having an emotional reaction to something. Then all of a sudden you look at them and they're in this physical state of turmoil, and you realize what's going on. You just had an empathic experience. Getting back to Star Trek, there was this episode where these other beings who were extreme telepaths did not communicate in words at all. They would communicate in an entire, let's call it a cloud of information, because the word cloud is becoming common online. So they would have a complete comprehension of all of these concepts, feelings, sensations, emotions, perceptions, and intent, everything they intended to say, all at once. And they would send it all at once. And so when they tried to communicate with Troi, she was completely overwhelmed, because it was basically like, oh, you're doing all this stuff to me all at once. I can't sort it out. That's basically like what your angel is going to do to you. I mean, it's not that extendedly intense, at least not for me, it isn't. But that's what's happening. You're getting all of this stuff all at once, and so you'll have, at least for me, it physically moves me, a sudden apprehension of everything that he's trying to say, and then basically you have to like move it down into the lower centers to try and sort it out so you can like speak it vocally, and you put it into human language. And that's why the languages of light are easy for me to do, is because you don't have to think about translating them. It's just an imprint expressed through the throat chakra, and the arbitrariness of language becomes incredibly clear in the languages of light, because the words don't matter. It's everything that's behind the words. I hope that clears it up, at least. And so to have that sudden apprehension, it's not words, it's not a voice, at least for me, and maybe that's why in this book he calls it a silent voice, because it isn't this booming thing that happens, and oh, I know, it's my holy guardian. At least not for me, okay? Just my experience. Okay. Moving on. Still mind, open mind, silence. Now I want to read another section. And this is more getting to... I hope this clears some stuff up. I'm probably on another 15 minutes already. Whoa! Holy crap, I'm on 32. Okay. Moving on. Now I'm going to stop.